Hello, my name is Jeswill Ewungkem, and my community's project was about respectability politics and whether it would work as a viable solution to racism against Black people in America. Throughout my process, I researched arguments for and against respectability politics, and by the end of the project, I had discerned that I disagreed with it. But what is respectability politics? Respectability politics revolves around the idea that marginalized/oppressed groups can fight their own problems by changing their own actions. Specifically for Black people in America, respectability politics asks whether a way Black people in America can fight racism and discrimination is through self-reflection and reform. The term of respectability politics originated in 1993 when author Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham coined the term with the politics of respectability in her book. She specifically used the term as a way to describe the Women's Convention of the Black Baptist Church during Progressive Era and their work. Ms. Higginbotham claimed reform of individual behavior as a goal in itself and as a strategy for reform. Despite the first use of the term being in the early 1990s, ideas around respectability politics appeared much earlier. In the 1950s, if Black people wanted political benefits, they were expected to integrate themselves into white society and act white. A good example of this is the town of Tuskegee, Alabama. In their 1963 book, Kwame Ture and Charles V. Hamilton explained how Tuskegee was not acknowledged in politics by white politicians. Ture and Hamilton claimed that Black people were constantly being forced to prove themselves to white people, because when one aspect of whiteness was achieved, a new assignment appeared. Some of the arguments for respectability politics were the comparison of the financial status of Asians and Black people in America, with Asians having the highest average income of anybody in America, while Black people having the lowest. Another argument for was Black on Black crime, specifically the lack of accountability shown towards Black officers committing acts of police brutality. An example of this is the officers who murdered Tyree Nichols and the lack of outrage shown by the public at this type of event. Another argument for it was Black culture and the negative ways certain celebrities impact the image of Black people. Promoting gang culture, vulgar topics, and saying explicit things not only in interviews and songs, but in just personal videos. These types of things can have a negative impact on the way Black culture is viewed. Some of the celebrities that were most talked about in this specific issue were Sexy Red and Annalie Choppa, as two artists that can promote gang violence and talk about vulgar topics a lot. Another argument for respectability politics was the BLM movement and protests in 2020, specifically the violent protests affecting, in a sense, as a lot of them had stealing of burning stores, stealing from stores, and then the alleged misuse of funds by the organization of BLM, with apparently the funds that were given to BLM were used for personal reasons by the leaders and higher ups in the organization rather than help the Black community. And with these types of accusations being made by people within the organization, it does not look good and takes away from the actual message that they were trying to spread. And finally, dressing and wearing hairstyles that are deemed socially acceptable as a way to avoid racism, whether it's twists, locks, or other hairstyles that may not be deemed as formal or acceptable. The arguments against respectability politics were how the model minority myth does not take context into account. The different ways Asians and Black people came to America has a large effect on the place they are in today, as well as the different types of discrimination they faced. It's true both groups were discriminated against and marginalized, but it's these specific ways that has large to do with this topic. The lingering effects of slavery, a lack of generational wealth, redlining, and a lack of funding communities all contribute to the current state of Black people's financial status in America. Another argument against respectability politics was the fact that Tyree Nichols actually did get a lot of recognition, and not only that, but the officers who killed him went to jail. This is not something that's consistent with many of the other officers during the during the police brutality protests, as a big problem was that a lot of them were not being incarcerated and were being let back out into the streets to continue to work as police officers. Not to mention that the problem with the biggest problem and the reason people might not think that Tyre Nichols was as well known or heard was because he's getting compared to people like George Floyd, who's the biggest incident of police brutality in the last 50 years at least. Another argument against it was that pushing ideas and the reputation of individual Black celebrities onto all Black people is a racist and unfair generalization, taking away the individuality of each person and kind of putting Black people under one category, as just because a certain rapper or certain artist may act in a way that you do not approve of, it does not give you the liberty to look down on all Black people. Finally, limiting hairstyles and clothes Black people can wear does not really count as equality, as restricting the freedoms of one group just because they're part of this group. This is unfair treatment and again is not equal. When starting with my research, I was already not necessarily one who agreed with respectability politics. I already kind of turned away from the idea a little bit, but I hadn't really done any research on it and had only heard the term. And I was also aware of the fact that I had only really heard extreme iterations of both sides and both arguments. So people who were either sometimes people who were like victim blaming and kind of fully blaming the status of Black people in America today, like on Black people, rather than trying to use it as a solution. And so I was already like turned off from the idea of respectability politics. But I decided to do the research, and after doing research, I now even more strongly believe that respectability politics would not work as a solution to racism in America. And I just feel I can articulate it slightly better just with all the research I have. As I just feel like respectability politics is not a solution to racism, but rather a cover up and a way to avoid the conversations about it. As yes, you may decrease the amount of racist incidents that happen because there's just less chances and less ways for people to come after that people may be able to come after and have excuses to come after Black people. But the actual racism and the racist ideologies and systems still exist within America and within the people. And so anytime a Black person does step outside the boundary of what might be socially acceptable, they will experience racism. Not to mention that respectability politics doesn't actually get to the like everyday racist issues people may experience. The one-on-one encounters with random people where you don't necessarily do anything that they have a problem with it. They just don't like you because of color. And respectability politics doesn't really fix these types of problems. It more so covers up racism and avoids it. Uh, the best way I figured to explain this was through the analogy of a building. And so the building itself represents racism against Black people in America. And the top of the building represents the actions of Black people, while the bottom of the building represents the racial ideologies and systems that exist inside America. So if you have a building, say this building is crumbling, so you have a crumbling building. Respectability politics aims to fix the top of the building rather than the bottom. So while yes, by fixing the actions of Black people, the building may look better, it may look shinier, may look cleaner, but it's still susceptible to falling. But by fixing the bottom of the building, you're cleaning up the actual ideology and fixing the actual ideology system that exists in America. The building is now stable and it won't be able to fall.